Out of the Park Baseball puts you in charge of your favorite Major League Baseball franchise as you guide it through unlimited seasons of championship chasing. Trade players, sign free agents, draft prospects, set lineups and pitching assignments, call the shots from the dugout, and much more. If GMs and managers can do it in real life, you can do it in Out of the Park Baseball. Our first 3 tutorials covered Out of the Park's 16 basics, managing your team during a game, and overall team management. Now we're going to show you how to create historical and fictional leagues. Historical leagues let you recreate baseball history. You can go as far back as 1871 and move forward through history. Not only do real players show up during their actual rookie years, but you'll see expansion and rule changes happen according to history too. You can even shuffle the deck and change all those things if you want, and you can play through the current day and beyond. Want to start in 1871 and play through the year 2050? Sure, Out of the Park lets you do that. Let's walk through a basic historical setup. Let's go with 1977. By default, the game imports all of baseball history up to that year, so if you want to turn on commissioner mode and bring back Babe Ruth, you can do that. The second option is off by default. It tells Out of the Park to randomly introduce players from throughout history. So we might have guys like Ty Cobb and Cy Young showing up here in the late 1970s. When you select that option, you can choose minimum and maximum years, so the players who show up will be limited to a certain era. We'll leave that option off for now and move on to that optimized player ratings dropdown, which is set to career play by default, meaning that the game will recalculate player ratings based on their historical stats after each season. That way, their numbers will be close to reality barring any injuries. Single season replay is useful when you don't plan on continuing beyond the current season. The advanced options are useful when you want to dig into baseball at a quantum level, so to speak. If you want to use a player database you've obtained elsewhere, such as from one of those friendly folks on our mod forums, you can click the button to choose it. By default though, the game already has the path to the historical database in place, so you just need to go through the other options. Starting with the first drop-down, you can base players' ratings on their actual stats or on neutralized stats, meaning the effects of pitcher and hitter-friendly parks are eliminated. For example, many baseball historians have speculated that Willie Mays' numbers probably would have been even better if he hadn't played half his games in cavernous, windy Candlestick Park. So the neutralized approach would give a guy like him a little boost. Put him on a team playing in a bandbox and see what happens. Next, players' potential ratings, meaning the ceiling their abilities should reach during their careers, can be changed from the default, which is remaining years of their career. That's the most accurate way to replay history, since it makes the game guide players' careers along the paths they actually followed. But the other options allow you to indulge in some what-if scenarios and see what will happen. The career totals option bases potential ratings on players' pasts as well as their futures, which means they could be dragged down a little if their early years weren't very good, or maybe boosted a little if they overperformed. Peak seasons of career assigns potential ratings based on players' best years, while remaining peak seasons means Out of the Park will use the best years ahead of them according to their real-life stats. The fielding ratings and pitcher stamina options follow the same basic principle. You can use the season that you're about to start, the best 3 years of their career, or the player's entire career. The 3-year period is the default option, as it's the best for playing forward through history. The random left-right splits option is there because historically, records usually weren't kept regarding how hitters performed against lefty and righty pitchers. As a result, that checkbox is active by default, so right-handed hitters will do better against lefty pitchers and vice versa. If you uncheck it, hitters' ratings will be equal against lefties and righties. The last 2 options for adjusting hitters and pitchers tell Out of the Park how to handle those guys who hit 500 in a dozen at-bats that season, or pitchers who no-hit opponents all year but only threw 5 innings. Realistic numbers have been entered here by default, so there's nothing to change unless you want to start messing around with history. If you want to take Joe Schmo who hit 5 home runs in 10 career at-bats and turn him into Babe Ruth, that's your business. You can click Show Summary to hide the advanced options. Click Next Step to continue. In Step 2, you can tell Out of the Park to use the actual transactions and lineups from that season, which is perfect for a one-season replay, but not so much fun if you want to see what could have been had teams made different decisions. The minor leagues are disabled by default because there won't be enough players to fill their rosters when you start a historical season. However, you can always add them later. Once you have several seasons under your belt and there are plenty of players in your world to fill those rosters. If you leave those options alone, the teams use reserve rosters where extra players reside until you want to promote them to the parent club. If you want to use one, some, or all of the minor league levels in your historical game, the last two options come into play. The first one fills the minor league rosters with fictional players so they can function properly. But the second option lets you block those guys from reaching the majors. So Joe Schmo can't take over your league, unless you want him to, of course. If you want minor leagues in your game, but you don't require them to have full rosters, Out of the Park takes care of that by using ghost players, who enable those teams to function even if they only have a couple of players each. Over time, the draft will fill the minor leagues with actual players, so the ghosts will be used less and less. If you click the advanced mode option at the bottom, you'll go down a rabbit hole full of myriad options and settings. There's way more in that screen than we could possibly cover in this tutorial, but all those things are available later in your league settings screen. So the option is there for those power users who know what they're doing and want to start tinkering now. Let's move on. In step 3, the first option is related to some of those advanced options in step 1. The default option in the drop-down recalculates player ratings before each subsequent season using their actual stats, so their careers will be guided in line with history. Note that if you stick with the default, you'll override any changes you made to the base potential ratings on drop-down in step 1. However, the default in that first step drop-down matches the default found here, so if you didn't make any changes, you're fine. You could also let Out of the Park's development engine take over, which means players' careers will have much more random chance built into them. Prominent players could have their careers changed drastically from history, while unknowns could become major stars. Finally, you could disable player development, which is good for those historical replays where you want to just do one season. The next two options dictate whether Out of the Park will automatically introduce expansion teams when they showed up throughout history, and if it will hold an expansion draft so those teams can choose players. If you don't hold an expansion draft, those teams will have to use the amateur draft and free agency to fill their rosters. If they can't do so from those sources, the game won't be able to continue, which means you'll have to go into league settings and tell Out of the Park to fill their rosters with fictional players. In addition to introducing expansion teams, Out of the Park will automatically change league configurations according to history. For example, when the 1969 season arrives, the game will add the Kansas City Royals, Seattle Pilots, Montreal Expos, and San Diego Padres expansion teams, and it will split the American and National Leagues into 2 divisions each. Finally, Out of the Park will also adjust the financial settings after each season, so ticket prices, player salaries, and other costs don't remain frozen as the decades pass. Checking that box tells the game to keep up with the times and not be like those elderly relatives who keep telling you how much a hot dog at the ballgame cost when they were kids. Moving on to step 4, we start with scouting accuracy. Your team scouting director is responsible for the player ratings you see. If he's not very good and you replace him with someone with better skills, you'll see a ratings change that will be more reflective of reality. It's a way for Out of the Park to introduce a little fog of war and ensure you can't just choose all the best players and expect to win 120 games every season. However, scouting is disabled when playing in historical leagues, so you see 100% accurate ratings for all players. If you'd rather use scouting, you can turn it on after creating the league. The next two drop-downs decide the rating scales you want to use for players' actual and potential ratings. 1 to 20 is the default, and 20 to 80 is the one used by scouts in real life, but you can change both ranges to whatever suits you best. The next option is only useful if you have more than Major League Baseball in your setup, such as the minor leagues. If you check that box, player ratings are shown relative to the currently selected league. For example, if you look at a utility player with average ratings, but switch the league menu to a AAA league, you will see his ratings jump, because while he's an okay player at the big league level, he would be a standout if he went back to the minors. That option can be great when evaluating farm players to see how good they are compared to the next minor league level up, or compared to major league players. It's also handy for getting apples-to-apples comparisons of players in other countries, such as guys in Japan's Nippon Professional Baseball League. A player who's a standout in Japan may not actually be that great if he played in the United States. Finally, we have the face gen settings, which tell Out of the Park to create realistic player and coach pictures. The caps and jerseys in those images change when they switch teams, they age over time, and their expressions change according to their current moods. You can tell the game to not create face-gen pictures for fictional players and coaches, which is the default. You can also choose to have pictures created for all of them or just for Major League guys in the case of players. The color mode drop-down lets you change the pictures to black and white or sepia toned, both of which are fun options when playing leagues from the early 20th century and you want a more authentic look and feel. The Advanced Mode button does the same thing as it does in steps 2 and 3. Now let's finish the setup. These options were covered in the video discussing Out of the Park's basics, so please see it if you're not familiar with what's on this screen. We'll assume you know what these options are, so we'll take control of the Kansas City Royals in GM plus Manager mode. The Advanced Mode button at the bottom takes you into the same screen found when clicking Advanced Mode in the previous step. The Add a League button is another advanced option that lets you do additional tinkering with the default setup. We'll leave those alone, but feel free to ask on our forums if you want to learn more. When you click Start Game, you'll end up in the same place where you start a current day Out of the Park League. See our second and third videos covering in-game management and team management to learn more if you haven't watched those tutorials yet. Now let's cover custom leagues, which allow you to indulge in various flights of fancy. We'll head back to the start screen and click New Custom Game. The Create Real World option is a 3-step process similar to the Historical League setup, except it allows you to set up a 2015 season. We'll skip it along with the Historical League setup since we already covered that, and move on to Fictional Leagues. That's a setup that lets you indulge in all kinds of flights of fancy. Maybe you want a small regional league set in the Northeast, or perhaps you'd like to pretend baseball is popular somewhere it currently isn't and set up a major league there. Or you could set up an American alternative to Major League Baseball, or create a league set in a fantasy realm, or anything else you want. Many people also like to create best-of leagues with various teams from throughout history. If you're interested in doing that, keep watching this video. In step 2, there's an option to switch over to historical team selection. You start with one of 13 predefined structures and modify it from there. When the game talks about sub-leagues, it uses the term in the sense that the American and National Leagues are sub-leagues of Major League Baseball. So while you're limited to 2 sub-leagues, you can have up to 50 divisions per sub-league and up to 50 teams per division. So yeah, you could create the World Jupiter League if you want. However, note that really large leagues require some solid computing horsepower to run effectively. You can start with one of 8 real-world configurations and populate it with fictional players if you'd like. When you choose one of those options, the setup process goes through many of the same steps as when you create a historical league. The Advanced Mode button in this step and in subsequent steps does the same thing it does in the Historical League setup, so you can refer back to that part of the video. Once you have your league set up, it's time for step 2. The second step is where you can lose yourself in all kinds of setups. If you realize you would have preferred more teams, you can always add them when you're done from league settings. This is also where you can use historical teams rather than fictional ones, but we'll get to that in a moment. You can choose any nation in the world as your headquarters for your league, and the region selection, which is optional, allows you to limit your league to a certain part of the world if you want. The baseball quality number refers to how prominent baseball is in a certain country. For example, if you choose baseball quality 5 countries, you'll get teams in the United States, Japan, Venezuela, and other powerhouse nations. At the other end of the spectrum, baseball quality 0, countries include Algeria, Syria, Egypt, and so forth. Once you've chosen those things, you can name your league, give it an abbreviation, and decide its level. Next, you can go with the random cities and nicknames that were chosen, or you can edit those fields. You can also change what country each team resides in. The randomized buttons at the bottom are a fun way to see what kind of names Out of the Park has in its database. Anyone want to play for the biscuits? Your fictional world will also have a full minor league system from the start, since you'll want plenty of players to keep your world moving. But you can get rid of the farm teams and use the reserve roster rule if you want. When you include minor leagues, those teams will have random cities and names that you can change later. If you'd prefer to go with a best of league, click the button and begin choosing the teams. When you select a year, the teams that existed then automatically populate the second drop-down. If you don't make decisions for some of the slots, Out of the Park will create fictional teams. If you change your mind, just click the button to return to the fictional setup, but notice that any historical teams you choose will carry over. Whether you go with a fictional league or a best of one, The rest of the setup process is the same. In step 3, you decide which year's settings you want to use. The year you select dictates the strategies, financials, and statistical output. For example, if you choose 1905, teams won't use closers since their bullpen pitchers were considered the second-string hurlers back then. Player salaries will be less than today's team's groundskeepers, and 10 home runs per season will equal power hitter. The league will also start in that year since it has to use a calendar, even if the teams are historical ones pulled from different eras. So you can tell Out of the Park to automatically adjust everything as it moves to subsequent seasons. The fantasy draft option dumps all the players into a pool so you can hold an inaugural draft, and the schedule settings allow you to create seasons that are longer or shorter than the standard 162 games, with the ability to change the start date and the number of games per series. Note though that if you create an abnormally long season, such as 400 games, you'll probably run into some problems later because the playoffs won't even begin by the time the next season is supposed to start. Steps 4 and 5 are the same as historical league creation, so we won't rehash them here. Once you're done, you can play your league just like any other Out of the Park league. As we've shown, Out of the Park offers many powerful ways to create custom baseball worlds. Have fun creating yours. Thanks for watching.